Today we're going to talk about the hidden tribes of the Amazon basin. Now I say hidden because they're hiding themselves. And what we'll learn to talk about is the idea that they're uncontacted. And they'd like to stay that way, and this is what we'll begin talking about today. What does it mean to be uncontacted? These are people who understand that they live in a larger world, but they choose to remain uncontacted. In short, because they haven't had any good, peaceful contact with the world. The contact that they've had to date and been passed down to them through oral tradition has been violent contact. It's been contact that has diminished them, has compromised them, and resulted with the decimation of many of their peers. And so consequently, these are people who choose to remain uncontacted. Right now, there are 67 to 70 uncontacted tribes in Brazil, which makes it the country with the largest number of uncontacted tribes in the world. There are some other tribes that are in Venezuela, some in Bolivia, also some in Colombia. And there's also some African tribes as well that wish to remain uncontacted. But Brazil has the largest number of uncontacted tribes in the world. Very little is known about these people, but what we do know about them is that they wish to remain uncontacted. And you'll say, Patrick, how could you possibly know such a thing? If they haven't been contacted, how do we know that they wish to remain uncontacted? And so this is how we know. All right? So if you came home with this airplane, how those of you who are amateur aviation, if you came home with this airplane, you'd get a sense that you probably weren't welcome where you were flying, right? So this is a work of art, actually. It's been created to demonstrate what happens when these planes go too close to these tribes. Now there's even been drones that have been shot out of the sky, all kinds of things. These people are incredibly good shots. And there have been planes that have actually been shot down by some of these arrows. They've gone right through the fuselage and brought some of these planes down. And they did not meet such a good end. So these tribes routinely shoot arrows at people. They kill outsiders, and they hide deep in the forest. And so I'd say, you know, if you had a neighbor that you went to visit, and the neighbor continued to move away from you every time you came to visit, and then you sent one of your friends over to visit them, and they killed that person, or they shot arrows at you, you'd get a pretty good sense that they didn't want anything to do with you and that they wanted to be left alone. And this is the message these people are sending us, and they're hoping that we're getting the picture. What we do know, I'm going to talk today about some of the tribes that we have some limited contact with and some that we have some knowledge through contact with other tribes. So it's not that the outside world has been contacting them, but that some of their other tribe members have made themselves known and discussed these other uncontacted tribes. Some of these tribes are nomadic hunter-gatherers. They're able to build a home within hours and abandon it days later. So we're now seeing that many of these tribes are nomadic, not necessarily by choice. Many of them are nomadic because they feel a need to continue to be on the move. In Acre, Brazil, there are as many as 600 Indians belonging to 4 different groups. They live in relative seclusion in several territories that are largely untouched. So as we discussed in one of the earlier lectures, Brazil has dedicated a large portion of land to the native peoples. And so these people are able to live in this land, and they're able to go deep into the heart of this land to be away from most people. Now, there is some encroachment, and I'll show you in a little bit some of this encroachment, but this gives you an idea of what some of these villages look like, some of the ones that they have shown. This is a drone shot that's gone overhead. Most tribes use these enormous bows and arrows. One bow was found measuring over 4 meters. That's 12 feet. That's a large bow. And so they're able to shoot great distances into trees. What the bows lack in accuracy with small targets, they have an abundance of arrows So they're able to tire animals out often. So animals that are high up in the trees, monkeys, they'll simply keep these animals on the move, and then an animal will get tired, fall, or that they'll eventually be able to shoot it. Tortoise meat has been known as a preferred meat. We know this because there have been, in some of these nomadic areas, we found large gatherings of tortoise shells outside. Some of these groups are very strong and appear to be getting stronger, while other groups appear to be diminishing. And I'll talk with you about the differences of these groups and why. Tiny fragmented groups live in isolation, and they're the survivors of brutal land grabs. They have been targeted, hunted, and murdered by loggers, ranchers, and others. So the very industries that we rely on today to supply our global food source are often the ones that are responsible for the decimation and the murder of these people. An estimated 350 Awa natives live in Brazil. Only 100 of them are considered isolated, and they've chosen to live apart from even their main tribe. And you'll see that even within some of the groups in Manaus. Some of you may have even met the Toi Yuca Tribe, which is a splinter group of the Desana tribe. They lived along the river. So for those of you who went to visit the indigenous tribe, you met this group, and they're a splinter group from the Desana tribe, which is further in the jungle. These people come because it's their desire to have their children attend school and to eventually begin to mainstream them. But they also come as really emissaries to show people a little bit of their culture. And so they live along the banks of the Rio Negro. Sadly, in 2011, a young girl was burned alive by loggers in this area. She wandered into a government-protected area, which was, at the time, being logged. They burned her body, and they left a note on a piece of wood telling all of her tribal people to stay away, or this would happen to them as well. And so these are the kinds of things that these poor people are contending with today. Why has the fight for land in Brazil become so violent? Brazil's desire to grow is threatening its own people. They've created a law that allows anyone effectively to come into Brazil, to take over land, and if they can show effective use for 1 year and 1 day, that land is given to them by the government, regardless of ownership. So imagine if you're on a huge parcel of land and people have come into the fringe of your territory, maybe 50,000 acres, and they've clear-cut it, and they turn it into farmland, and there's no means for these people under a rule of law to be able to effect justice. There's no one looking out for these people. There's no courts for them to go to. And so consequently, they lose their land because the companies can come in and they can show that they're farming this land, making effective use, whereas the native peoples can't possibly show effective use because they're not clear-cutting anything. They're just living off the land. So there's nothing to be able to demonstrate. And so consequently, the government has really put its own people at odds with its own progress. So the result is the clearing of large swaths of forest and the disregard for those who inhabit them. Large corporations have now created pastures for our global demand for beef, which continues to grow, and they claim all of this land as their own. And for the indigenous, it makes it nearly impossible for them to claim effective use of their tribal lands. So large portions of these lands were simply given away to other people, and still are, in fact. However, in 2014, the Brazilian government took action and sent the military in to protect the Awa tribal lands. It's now going into many other tribal territories as well, but sadly, the scope of the incursions is so great and the damage so devastating that they're unable to allocate their resources to continue to protect these people. Most tribes live off of the forests, the savannas, and a mixture of hunting, gathering, and fishing, and a great deal of agriculture as well. They grow staple crops such as manioc, sweet potato, corn, bananas, and pineapples. And you can see here this group of young boys hunting peccaries. You can see that what they do is they actually make these animals like a backpack. They tie their hooves together, strap them on their back, and they go back home. But this is a very common practice among the native tribes. Some tribes, like the Matis, use blowguns with poison darts to catch their prey. Most of them, however, use bow and arrows, and some of them have been integrated. The ones that live closer to the main cities are able to use shotguns. Nuts and berries and fruits such as the acai and peach palm are regularly harvested, and fresh honey is considered a treat. So the things that we consider to be excellent foods, they also consider to be excellent foods. The superfood of the acai, which is terribly expensive in our grocery stores, they have it in abundance here in the rainforest. Fish, particularly in the Amazon, is an important food. Many indigenous tribes actually use a type of poison, and I'm going to show you in a minute how they do it, but it's very, very interesting. They will crush the roots and the bark of trees, and it creates a poison that they float in the water, which depletes the oxygen from the water, and then the fish temporarily stunned and die, and they float to the top where they're gathered in baskets. And I'll show that to you right now. I should be showing it to you right now. I think I've got a problem with the audio. Guys, can you help me with the audio? Let's not be so quiet. Give this guy a hand, huh? Which is terribly embarrassing for him, I'm sure. Are we connected? Okay. Oops. There we go. Thanks very much. There we go. Now we just got to turn up the volume. We're so close. Give me the thumbs up when we're ready. Okay.
Though the river has traditionally played little part in the lives of the Guarani, they have been forced to fish, especially at times when hunting is scarce. They don't fish in the rivers, but rather in the shallow streams and pools. Only the younger members of the tribe know how to swim. The technique they use is simple but very effective. They temporarily poison the river. For this they need barabasco, a wild and relatively scarce liana containing toxic substances which eliminates all the oxygen in the water, but without harming the environment. Once the nets are ready and the barabasco has been crushed so it dissolves easily in the water, Nyame and Vara go into the pool and start spreading the poison, washing the liana several times. In a few minutes, small fish start appearing in what had seemed to be a stagnant, lifeless pool. The couple carefully collect them and store them in a banana leaf. As with hunting, the Guarani have their beliefs about fishing. They never eat the head of the fish because if they do, they will never be able to fish again. Fishing, especially in the pools and streams rich in nutrients washed down from the slopes of the Andes, is a guaranteed source of protein, but no Amazon society bases its diet on fish. In less than an hour, Vara and Nyame have collected enough fish to eat. The banana leaf now contains up to 12 different species.
Actually, one of the tribes, the Nanawene, do not eat red meat. They rely on fishing solely for their food source. So the gentleman in the video did say that there wasn't any tribe that lived solely on fish, but this tribe does. And I'll actually show you how they do it. It's really ingenious. They create wooden dams called wawitinas, and these wooden dams stop all of the major large fish. The small fish pass on through, and they stop all of the large fish. They dam them, and then they slowly catch them one by one. They cut them, and then they smoke them to use them for months at a time. This is interesting because they're a progressive tribe. Many of the tribes only live off the food that they catch that day. So they'll hunt that day, and they will eat what they've caught that day. These people are a little bit progressive in that they understand certain times of the year for fishing, and so they will create these dams, and then they will dry this fish for their continued use. If you saw in the video, the one gentleman had his a band going around his midriff, and he had the foreskin of his penis tucked into it. And the reason they do this is so that the penis itself is not exposed to the water, where there are some razor-sharp, small, almost microscopic fish that can swim up the penis and into the urethra, and when they come out, it's terribly painful, like the barb of a hook. And so consequently, the men who go in the water will often take their penis, take the foreskin, and then tuck it in. I'm not sure it's comfortable. It certainly doesn't look comfortable. Nonetheless, I'm sure that it's much more comfortable than the alternative. A handful of people are nomadic hunter-gatherers. So we'll see that the majority of them are agriculturalists, with a few supplementing with hunting and fishing. And there are some tribes that are nomadic hunter-gatherers. They live in small family groups, generally throughout the forest. They are not located very close at all to the major cities. They erect shelters from saplings, and they live in these for a short period of time before continuing on. Many nomadic tribes have adapted nomadic lifestyles. They don't wish to. But when they live in their territories that are under constant threat from gold miners, from loggers, from ranchers, and now, sadly, from the drug trade, which is now using the Amazon to bring drugs up, south from Colombia and also from the rainforests themselves. Many of the cartel groups from Colombia and Venezuela are now going into the rainforest areas of Venezuela and Brazil, putting in their drug production facilities, and then using the rivers to ship them out. And so anyone who gets in the way of that is murdered. Life and balance. These are people who work every single day. They'd have no idea or concept of what is a weekend. Every day is new for them. The idea of a week, the idea of a month is not really something that they consider. They do consider the concepts of the seasons and of the years that pass. They have a vague understanding of the passage of time, but not in the same ways that we do. They measure their days, they measure their months and their years by the passing of seasons and by the passing of events in their lives. They work a few hours in the morning, and then in the afternoon they rest. So we'll say, well, they didn't put in a full week's worth of work. Well, if they work 5 hours for 7 days a week, they're putting in a pretty full week on their schedule. And it's not like our schedule for sure, but nonetheless, well, it's a lot like your schedule. What am I talking about? Like all indigenous peoples, they carry detailed mental maps of the entire area. So many of these people are used as guides when logging operations come in, when miners come in. They use these people as guides to learn about the area. They spend weeks and even months involved in tribal ceremonies. So when the time of the year comes, if they have several young men who are going to be initiated, they will spend weeks and even sometimes 2 or 3 months in these initiation rituals. They will take the time to spend with each other. They'll go on community hunts. What we would consider to be ceremonies, a religious ceremony, can often last for them for weeks. with celebrations, with food, but they also intersperse their work into these celebrations. But it's a constant celebration of their life and their way of life. I'd like to talk briefly about a comparison, since I presume that most of us come from a Judeo-Christian background. It's largely the case, and I apologize for those who do not fit into this area, but I'd like to kind of give you some background in how they see the world versus how we perhaps see the world. Socially oriented versus nature-oriented systems of worship. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Bible story, the creation story, and how that sets us up for our understanding of how the world works. In a socially oriented society, the focus is on people. We are considered to be subjugators of nature. In the Bible creation story, man is given dominion over all creation. And so consequently, what that means is when we have dominion, it gives us the right to dominate and to subjugate. And so consequently, that's how we see nature. For most of us, we don't talk about living in the woods or being a part of the woods. We talk about making a special trip there, right? We go camping. We spend time on the river. It's an event. It's something that's apart from the normal way that we live. And so consequently, nature is something that's become apart from us. Not a part of us, but apart from us. We've come to the idea that to dominate nature for our own good is the way we must live, that nature is meant to serve our needs. Where in a nature-oriented society, they have the focus on the earth. They believe in cultivating the earth, and their mythologies talk about preserving and cultivating the earth. And the reason they do that is because to cultivate and to preserve and to care for the earth is also to care for themselves and to cultivate themselves. That they are a part of the earth. They don't see themselves apart from, but a part of. Animists do not try to control nature. They try to put themselves in accord with nature. Nature is neither good nor bad. It just is. It's the force of all, and that we're one with nature. Consider that in the Bible story of creation is written in a way that helps us see nature, our nature, as corrupt. It's where we come from the idea of original sin. And in a world where nature is considered corrupt, our nature is considered corrupt, it corrupts the entire natural world along with it. Every act that we do, every natural act is considered sinful. So when we think about the things that are normal in most lives for these people, it would be considered sinful for most of us. The idea of sharing wives, the idea of some of the ceremonies that they have, the sexual nature, all of these kinds of things are considered abhorrent to us because it's considered apart from nature. Animists see their lives as one with God. They see nature as their God. In our world, we tend to see, particularly in recent views, we see God as all-powerful, as all-seeing, as all-knowing, and interestingly, all good. And what this does is it creates a dichotomy for our understanding of God. These people see God as nature and nature as God, and so when a storm or an animal or a force of nature kills one of them, that's nature. That is the nature of their lives. However, they see nature as both good and bad, and their gods as both good and bad, reflecting the forces of nature. However, in our worldview, we see God as all good. And if we see God as all good, how difficult is it for us to reconcile a world where we have a God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-seeing, and all good? And how then do we justify devastation in our time? How do we justify the idea that people die from hurricanes or from storms or these ideas of mass murders? It's part of the nature of who we are. It's part of the nature of nature. And yet, because we see God as all good, the understanding then is that God somehow has allowed that or has caused that. And that's been a cause of concern for theologians for generations, for really hundreds of years, trying to understand how in a world that sees God as all-powerful and all good, how these things can happen. So it's something for us to think about and try to reconcile, and that these people at the earliest of times, they really are Stone Age reminders of how animism reconciles those ideas, because they see God as nature and nature as their God. So nature is considered subservient. Consequently, what we do is we destroy the forests, we eradicate species because we're separate from nature. And animists are one with nature. This is one of my favorite stories. There's a little boy who is out in the rainforest, and he finds this beautiful bird, and every single day he feeds this bird, and this bird comes to him and becomes his. He brings this bird home, and when the father is going out to bring in food and to talk with the mother to bring in food, the boy says, "Father, can you bring in food for my bird?" And the father, believing that he is above the bird, kills the bird. And upon killing the bird, he killed the bird's song, and with the song, he killed himself. That by killing the bird, he killed himself. And the moral of the story is that by destroying nature, we destroy our own nature. We are one and the same, and any sense of domination is an illusion. We simply perceive that, but as any of you who have studied the laws of physics, we don't perceive all. We only perceive a part, but we presume that we perceive all. And that's what happens. Domination is simply an illusion in a world where we're dependent on nature. The Kuriboh Tribe are an indigenous people of Brazil living in the western Amazon basin. In Portuguese, they're called cacheteiros. And cacheteiros means the people who club. So they're the clubbers, not as in people who go out to clubs. That's a completely different group of people. So much of what the outside world knows is based on the research of a Brazilian explorer, Sidney Pozuelo. He was one of the few people who have been allowed into these tribes to spend time with these people over the past 20 years. He started with his tribe in October of 1996. These people are some of the last people on earth to live in almost complete isolation. And the reason they live in isolation is they're really bad neighbors. They get into fights with just about everyone. There isn't anyone that they haven't offended or are not offended by. And so consequently, these people have determined that it's better for them to live apart than to live close to other people. Their hunting and war weapon of choice is the club. And aside from that, they use some poison darts, but they use almost no other weapon. They work 4 to 5 hours each day and then rest in their large huts. They have no known religious or spiritual practices, which is really interesting. This is one of the tribes that we would consider to be an anomaly in anthropology, because they really do not have any recorded stories or religions. They have some myths, but for the most part, they live off the land, and their stories are very basic. There hasn't been anything that we've learned yet that would indicate that they have an advanced religious system. But what is interesting is that they are very opportunistic in regards to life. When they are when they feel the pressure and the need to move, they will often kill their children in an urge to move quickly. So if they have children under the age of 2 or 3, in a very utilitarian way, they will simply kill their children if they feel that their tribe is under threat, because they can't put the entire tribe at risk by saving a couple of their children. And so consequently, knowing that every life is equal to them, they sacrifice the lives of the youngest tribe members who are unable to contribute and who might slow them down in their efforts to flee any sort of danger. Their diet includes fish, spider monkeys, peccary, wild fruit, manioc, corn, and their leading cause of death is malaria. So they die in much the same way as many other people in the rainforest by malaria. The problem is that they are located so far away from the hospitals that by the time that they discover the symptoms, it's almost often too late. It takes them 5 to 6 days to get to any sort of care or to contact anyone for care, and the care that's available to them is not the care that will help them. So consequently, they have no access at all to modern health care. A dispute between about 20 members in the main tribe caused these two groups to separate, and there have been some violent interactions continuing with the Kuriboh people, but the figures of the main tribe are unknown. However, we do know there's about a few hundred individuals total of this tribe. So the big question, should these tribes be left alone? And there's a lot of conversation on both sides about whether or not these people should be left alone. And they have made some decisions about it, and I think they're, for the most part, good decisions. If we choose to make contact, will we do more harm than good? These isolated tribes, in much the same way as when we first arrived in the 1500s, these tribes still do not have any real means of fighting the diseases and the illnesses that we have. Certainly not the flu bug. Imagine the flu bug that changes every single year in our world. Imagine if that were get to these people. It would devastate the entire tribe within a matter of probably a week or two. Are these tribes truly uncontacted? When we think about uncontacted, we think that they really choose to be away from everything, but even the most isolated tribes are in contact with some people at some time. Everyone has neighbors. These people know who their neighbors are. Even those of us who maybe live in the far outreaches of Canada and that we live maybe 45 minutes to an hour away from the city, we still know who our neighbors are, even though we may not see them every single day. These people are the same way. They know who their neighbors are. They know where to find them and how to reach them. But they may not have friendly relations with them. Some of the misconceptions are that these uncontacted tribes live in a bubble of wilderness and that they have no idea about the big world outside, that they have no idea that the rest of us have cell phones or that we travel in cars or in planes. Some of these people are aware of these things, and they've been in contact as recently as the 60s and the 70s. But they do know that the larger world exists. They know that they're not alone, and they know that they're unique. They know that they are not common, that their type of lifestyle is in fact unique. So they continue to live in their world because they want to be isolated for a reason. So why do uncontacted tribes make contact? Well, in 1996, a group of these villagers in the Acre state, they came across some people from uncontacted tribes who were coming in to steal crops, axes, and machetes. And they were doing it because they were afraid that other people were already encroaching on their land. So they came so that they could get the things that they needed to survive. It wasn't driven by a desire for material goods. They had been driven by violent attacks on them. Their people had been massacred, their houses set on fire by illegal loggers and cocaine traffickers. So these people come out of the jungle when forced out. And sadly, we don't know how to respond to them today. And there's two people here at least who I know saw this bird that's right behind here, the Scarlet Macaw. How many of you are bird watchers? Like the bird, were you able to see some Scarlet Macaws? They're spectacular. Well, this is actually very interesting in some of these uncontacted tribes, the need for having pets. This wasn't planned, but I'll talk about it a little bit. You'll see in many of these photos that these people have monkeys on their heads, or they'll have animals, sloths in their homes. This is very different from, say, the things that we see in the tourism where they're using them for tourism, for selling, for photos, those kinds of things. These people will actually feed these birds, and they'll come of their own accord. And sometimes they do hold them, but it's this desire to have pets. And that's a completely unique area of study. I don't know that it's even been approached. But this idea for even these indigenous peoples to have a sense of this wild, even in what they would consider their civilized world. So they want to have the beauty of nature surrounding them as well. And these ideas of pets for companions is obviously not unique to us. These people did not stumble upon the village by chance. They knew exactly where to go. They're experts in living in the forest, and they're experts in knowing where the outsiders are. So why do uncontacted tribes remain isolated? It's a single word: fear. Look at that little boy with the creature on his head, little monkey on his head. But people live in fear because the hostilities from the outside world keep them this way. It's not that they don't understand what the outside world offers. It's that they do understand, and they prefer to remain a part of it. Many of these people have been told stories over generations, some of them for hundreds of years, of the stories of the arrival of the men with clothes, the arrival of white man. And so these stories have been have been incorporated into their mythologies, into their tribal tales. But many of these stories are as recent as the 1960s through the 1990s, and they're very recent. Isolated tribes, this is another misconception, that isolated tribes have chosen to keep away from the modern evil world. So for those of us who are fed up with the world ourselves and think that this is the lifestyle we'd prefer to have, we often can understand, hey, you know what, we sometimes want to get away from the world. We find it disgusting ourselves and we'd like to get away. But that's not what motivates these people. Most of these tribes are very interested in participating in the social processes of our society. They want to be a part, they want to be connected, but they also know fully the consequences of their integration. And the consequences of their integration would largely mean their demise. In Brazil's Rondônia state, there's one man who lives in a single-person tribe, and he's been living there for quite a few years. The rest of his family and his tribe was decimated, and so he has been discovered out there living alone, but he fights anyone who comes close to his property, and he's now left alone. And this is the one man who is a tribe unto himself. So when he dies, his people and all of his stories and everything we knew about, we could have learned from him, will go with him. Now we'll talk a little bit about the threats. Since Europeans arrived in Brazil over 500 years ago, these native peoples have experienced genocide on a huge scale and the loss of a great deal of their land. This is a quote from the Inuit people. We didn't know the white people were going to take our land. We didn't know anything about deforestation. We didn't know about the laws of the white men. These quotes should sound familiar to any of us who come from North America, because these are very similar quotes to what the native peoples said, and they were written down when we came. Mining and hydropower is one of the great threats. Look at this hydro plant here, located in one of the most beautiful waterfalls you'll find anywhere. The government now is in such a rush to supply power to its increasing population that it's willing to put in these hydropower plants almost with minimal permitting and without the permissions of the actual owners of these lands, which are often tribal lands. These are some of the complexes, cheap energy, supporting with oil and these kinds of things these are being brought into the rainforest and powering some of their power plants. And imagine the oil and the pollution that comes from these and how it's essentially snuffing out life for many of these native people. Ranching is another area that's forcing the outright theft of millions of acres of land. How many of you have seen the movie The Mission with Jeremy Irons? Fantastic. For those of you who haven't, if you get a chance to watch it, it's a tremendous movie about the Jesuits coming to Argentina and Brazil back in, I believe, the 15th or 16th century. But they talk about the Guarani people. This is the Guarani tribe. And so the Guarani tribe was actually the tribe of the video that you saw too with the fishing. And this is also a man from the Guarani tribe. They're one of the largest tribes, but it gives you an idea of what these people were like and where they are today. So if you get a chance, it's called The Mission with Jeremy Irons. Sadly, these people are being systematically targeted. And I'm going to spend a minute or two on this because it's important that we understand this isn't meant to make any of us feel bad. If you take a look at me, I eat my fair share of beef, right? So I'm responsible, just like the rest of us, for what's happening. Our global desire for consuming meat and for consuming these types of products is what's really driving this. And it's for us to understand why it's happening and for us to also be perhaps a part of the solution. But when these companies come in, they understand that these native people stand in the way of their success. And that all they have to do is really kill the tribal leaders, and the entire tribe will separate and will move on. So now what's happening is some of these major corporations are actually hiring militias to come in and murder the leaders of these tribes. And they'll come in, they'll drop in by helicopter, they'll kill the leader, the chief, and the chief's son, as you know that that's where the power is passed from chief through the son. And if they kill both of those men, the tribe is without a leader. And so consequently, the people can come in, there's no one to negotiate, there's no one to stand up for them. And this is what's continuing to happen. And these people are pushed out within a matter of days. So imagine, you've lost your chief, and the next chief in line, and then 2 or 3 days later they come in with the bulldozers and push them all out, destroying everything. And these people are now living in shanty towns in this outside of Manaus. For those of you who are able to see some of those, they live along the sides of the roads in houses that are tin houses covered in tarps, and they're completely disconnected from their way of life. In the old days we were free, now we are no longer. So our young people think there is nothing left. They sit down and think, they lose themselves, and then commit suicide. This is from a woman of the Guarani Tribe. Today in the Guarani Tribe, suicide is the #1 cause of death among people under the age of 20. It used to be attacks from wild cats. It used to be malaria. And it used to be old age, that people only lived into their 40s. Now, even though some of these elders are living into their 50s and 60s, they're seeing their next generation being decimated by the disintegration of their culture and the fact that these children now have nothing to look forward to and no place to call home. The resolution. In 1987, Brazil's Department of Unknown Tribes concluded that all isolated people should not be contacted. Instead, natural reserves should be placed aside for them to live on and left for them to initiate contact. And that's all good and well. This is from Sidney Pozuelo, his quote. And it's all good and well, and that's a great idea to leave them alone. But the other side of this is that we must also protect these people. It can't be just leaving them alone. That we need to respect their boundaries, we need to respect where they call home, and we need to protect it. We need to make sure that the forces and the powers that be protect these people who are not able to protect themselves. Protecting uncontacted tribes is essentially protecting the rainforest. The world seems passionate about preserving the Amazon rainforest, which we know are the lungs of the world. They hold an inordinate amount of carbon, and once that's cut down, it's released into the atmosphere, which continues to cause global warming and other problems. But the answer may be found in preserving the peoples of the Amazon. Tribal peoples are the best guardians of their own land. When they're left to their own land, to protect their own land, people stay away. When the government allows and provides for their protection, they will protect their way of life, and in protecting their way of life, they will protect the rainforest along with it. Our job is to make sure that we keep out the illegal loggers, drug traffickers, and miners away from these pristine lands. In Brazil and throughout the Amazon basin, many of these tribes have retreated since the 16th century to present times. They hid themselves from the massacres. They hid themselves from enslavement and from all of the diseases that came with the men with clothes. And now they are aware of us, and they're aware of the dangers that come from being in close contact with us. They are vestiges of the Stone Age in the 21st century. They are a living reminder of the resilience and fragility of our ancient cultures in the face of our constant need and constant desire and push to develop. By Marta, who is a Guarani, she says, "We Indians are like plants. How can we live without our soil, without our land?" And I would close with one comment. It's that to eliminate these native peoples is to eliminate our conscience. The loss of our conscience would be helpful for some, but would be devastating for almost all of us. So what will become of us if we eliminate, or if we allow the elimination of these people who remind us of who we were and where we will go again? These people reflect our ability to protect the soul of humanity, to protect the vestiges of innocence, and they're our link to the past. To lose these peoples, like that little boy who lost his bird, to lose these people would be to lose our very soul. So the distinctions that we see between these people, it's easy to see them, the distinctions, isn't it? We see them in clothes, we see us in clothes, we see them walking naked, we see the ways they eat, the ways that we eat. But those distinctions are irrelevant, and they're simply illusions. The most important thing that we could take away from this is that we are one, and in the way that they see we are one, we're also one with nature. And for all of our progress and all of our knowledge and understanding, it would seem that that is the one lesson that we have all forgotten. And my goal is to hope and to help us remember a little bit of that today. So thanks very much for coming, folks.